The first thing Henry did was take my chair. Not in a metaphorical way. I mean literally my chair, the one I'd adjusted just right after 3 years in that office. When I walked back from a client call and saw him sitting there, legs stretched out, sleeves rolled up like he owned the place, something tight curled in my chest. I remember thinking, great, he's going to be one of those. I'm Charles, 32, project manager at a mid-sized consulting firm where nothing ever really changes until it does. My boss had gone on unexpected medical leave, and HR decided I needed temporary support. Enter Henry, 6-month contract. My replacement, technically, or my backup, or whatever polite word they used to avoid saying you're clearly overworked. He stood up immediately when he saw me. Too polite, too smooth. Sorry, was just warming the seat, he said, smiling like it was a joke meant just for me. I laughed, because that's what I do when I don't know what else to do. He moved, but the chair felt different after that, like it remembered him. Henry was taller than I expected. Not intimidating tall, just present. Dark hair that looked like it had been messed up on purpose. Calm eyes. The kind of guy who doesn't rush his words because he doesn't need to. Everyone in the office noticed him by noon. I noticed that everyone noticed him. He's just filling in, I told myself. Temporary. That word became important later. At first, things were strictly professional. I showed him the systems, the clients, the messes I'd been quietly managing alone for years. He listened, actually listened, asked smart questions, took notes, didn't pretend he already knew everything. That alone made him dangerous. By the end of the first week, people were CCing him on emails meant for me. By the second, they were asking him questions when I was sitting right there. He always redirected them back to me, but somehow it still felt like the room leaned his way. One night, we stayed late to finish a proposal. The office emptied out slowly until it was just the two of us and the hum of the lights. He loosened his tie, sighed, and leaned back in my chair again. You always work like this? He asked. Like what? Like you're the last one holding the building up. I shrugged. Someone has to. He looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Not intense, just thoughtful. You don't have to do it alone, you know? That was the first time he took up more space than he was supposed to. Not physically. In my head. After that, he started matching my pace. Coffee runs together. Quiet jokes during meetings. A shared look when someone said something stupid. It was subtle, but it was happening. I caught myself timing my mornings to when he arrived. Caught myself caring what I wore. Still, I kept telling myself the same thing. He's temporary. Then one Friday evening, as we were packing up, he hesitated by my desk. Hey Charles, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. A few of us are grabbing a drink. You should come. A few of us. But the way he said you made it feel like the invitation had been his alone. I almost said no. I usually did. But something about the way he was already halfway into my life, my chair, my work, my routines made it harder to refuse. Yeah, I said. Okay. I didn't know it then, but that yes was the moment Henry stopped being just my replacement and started becoming something else entirely. The bar was louder than I expected. One of those places that pretends to be casual but still charges too much for drinks and plays music just a little too loud for real conversation. I almost bailed the second we walked in. Almost. Henry didn't. He slid naturally into the space beside me at the bar, close enough that our arms brushed every time one of us moved. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to be distracting. He ordered for himself, then glanced at me. You still a bourbon guy? Or did that change while I wasn't looking? I blinked. I don't remember telling you that. He smiled. You didn't. You just look like one. I snorted despite myself. That's not a real explanation. Worked, though. It did. I let him order mine. The rest of the team spread out laughing, talking, existing loudly, but somehow Henry and I stayed in our own pocket of quiet. He asked about my career, but not in the boring "what's your 5-year plan" way. He asked why I stayed, what I liked, what I didn't say out loud at work. After my second drink, the edges of my usual restraint softened. I like being needed, I admitted, staring into my glass. Even when it's exhausting. Henry nodded slowly. Yeah, I figured. I glanced at him. How? You don't complain, he said. You just absorb everything. Like if you hold it all together long enough, maybe no one will notice how heavy it is. That hit uncomfortably close. For a second, I felt seen in a way that made my chest tighten. I covered it with a joke, something self-deprecating, something safe. He laughed but not too much, like he knew it was a deflection and let it slide. When we finally left, the night air felt cooler than it should have. The group split off toward rideshares and buses, conversations fading. Henry and I ended up walking the same direction without acknowledging it. So, he said, hands in his pockets. You heading straight home? Yeah, I said. You? Same. Guess we're neighbors for a block or two. The guess felt intentional, like he'd already known. We walked in silence for a bit. Not awkward silence. The kind that settles instead of stretches. At his corner, he stopped. This was fun, he said. Thanks for saying yes. Yeah, I said. It was. He held my gaze for a beat longer than normal. Then he nodded once and turned away. I stood there for a second after he left, my heart doing something stupid in my chest. The next week, things shifted. Nothing obvious. Just different. He brought me coffee without asking. I found excuses to loop him into conversations that didn't really need him. We started eating lunch together without calling it that, just happening to sit at the same table every day. One afternoon, I caught myself watching him talk in a meeting. The way his hands moved when he explained things. The confidence without arrogance. The fact that people listened. A thought slipped in before I could stop it. What happens when he's not temporary anymore? That scared me more than it should have. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, HR sent out an email. Subject: Contract Extension Henry L. 6 more months. I reread it twice. My stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with work. Henry looked over from his desk, catching my expression. Everything okay? He asked. I forced a smile. Yeah, just more of you, apparently. He grinned. Careful. You say that like it's a bad thing. I laughed, but it came out a little thin. Because somewhere between my chair, my routines, and my quiet evenings, Henry had stopped feeling like a substitute. And I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with that. 6 more months shouldn't have mattered. On paper, it changed nothing. Same desk, same responsibilities, same carefully defined temporary label. But I felt it everywhere. Henry relaxed after the extension. Not in a lazy way, more like someone who decided to unpack a suitcase instead of living out of it. He brought a real mug from home instead of using the sad office ones. Added a plant to his desk. Started talking about things beyond work without checking himself first. And I noticed all of it. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to pretend he wasn't settling into my life instead of just my job. He knew which meetings I hated, which clients drained me the most, when to interrupt me with a joke before I spiraled too far into control mode. One afternoon, I snapped at someone on a call. Not full-on yelling, but sharp enough that the room went quiet afterward. I hated that version of myself. I shut my office door and stared at my screen, jaw tight. A knock. Go away, I said automatically. The door opened anyway. Henry leaned against the frame, arms crossed. You good? No, I said. But I will be. He didn't move. You don't sound convincing. I exhaled hard. I don't have time for this right now. I know, he said gently. That's why I'm here. Something in my chest cracked just a little. He didn't try to fix anything. Didn't offer advice. Just stood there, present, until my shoulders dropped on their own. After a beat, he said, You don't have to be the strong one all the time, Charles. I looked up at him. Really looked. That was the moment I realized I was in trouble. Late nights that turned into takeout dinners. Texts about work that drifted into music recommendations and dumb memes. He started calling me C without asking. I pretended not to like it. I definitely liked it. People noticed. You two are close, someone said once, too casually. Henry just smiled. I changed the subject. What no one saw were the moments in between. The way his voice dropped when he said my name. The way I felt a strange, irrational jealousy when he laughed too easily with someone else. I told myself it was nothing. Stress, proximity, loneliness. Then came the night that ruined my ability to lie to myself. We were finishing another late deadline. The building was nearly empty again, city lights glowing through the windows. Done, he said. If I stare at this spreadsheet any longer, I might actually cry. You? Cry? I smirked. Unthinkable. He grinned. You want to grab something? My treat. Survival reward. I hesitated. Too late. Too tired. Too aware of how easily no could turn into regret. Okay, I said, but just food. The diner near the office was quiet at that hour. Vinyl booths, low lights, coffee that tasted like it had given up trying. We slid into a booth across from each other. Somewhere between fries and milkshakes, the conversation shifted. Less joking, more honesty. Can I ask you something? Henry said. Depends, I replied. Is it invasive? He smiled, then sobered. Why did you look so uncomfortable when my contract got extended? My heart stuttered. I lied. He didn't call me out, just watched me patiently, like he knew I'd get there on my own. I sighed. Because you're not supposed to stay, I said finally. You're a temporary solution. That's how this works. And? He asked quietly. And I don't handle change well, I admitted. Especially when it starts to matter. His gaze softened. It already matters. The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. For a second, I thought he might reach across the table. I thought I might let him. Instead, the waitress came by with the check, breaking the moment like a dropped glass. We paid. We left. We stood outside under the streetlights, neither of us ready to say goodnight. Charles, he said, voice low, I'm not trying to take over your life. I swallowed. It feels like you already are. He smiled sadly. Only because you let me. That was the problem. After that night, we pretended nothing had happened, which somehow made everything louder. At work, we slipped back into rhythm like professionals. Meetings, emails, deadlines. Anyone watching us would have seen two coworkers doing their jobs well. Maybe too well. Because now every normal interaction carried an undercurrent that buzzed just beneath the surface. Eye contact lasted a second too long. I started noticing how often Henry checked in on me without making it obvious. A Slack message after a rough meeting. A quiet "you okay?" murmured as we passed in the hallway. He never pushed. That restraint somehow made it worse. Then came the dinner. It wasn't planned. A client canceled late, freeing up an evening neither of us had expected to have. We were both already halfway out the door when Henry said, casually, "You hungry?" I should have said no. Instead, I said, "Always." His place was closer than any restaurant worth going to, and he offered without fanfare. No hesitation, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That should have been my warning. His apartment was clean but lived in. Books stacked unevenly. A jacket draped over a chair. Music playing low in the background, something warm and familiar I couldn't quite place. "You cook?" I asked, surprised. "Enough to keep myself alive," he said, grinning. "Sit. I'll make pasta." I watched him move around the kitchen, comfortable in his space like I was being let into something private without ceremony. He poured me a glass of wine without asking. I accepted it without comment. We talked. About nothing. About everything. About the jobs we'd taken because they felt safe instead of right. About the people we'd almost let get close and why we hadn't. "I'm not great at temporary things," Henry admitted, stirring the sauce. "I either detach completely or invest too much." I swallowed. "You picked the wrong contract, then." He met my eyes over his shoulder. Maybe I picked the right one. Dinner stretched longer than it needed to. The wine disappeared faster than it should have. "This is a bad idea." He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. "Yeah," he said softly. "It probably is." He didn't move away. Neither did I. When I left, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner. My head buzzed with too many thoughts and one undeniable truth. Henry wasn't just taking up space in my life anymore. I was making room for him. And once you do that, there's no such thing as temporary. The next morning was unbearable. Not because anything went wrong, but because nothing did. Henry was exactly the same at work. Calm, focused, professional. That restraint felt deliberate, cruel almost. I caught myself watching him constantly, looking for signs: nervousness, regret, anything. But he gave me none. He didn't avoid me. He didn't crowd me. He treated me with the same quiet respect he always had, and somehow that made my chest ache worse. At lunch, I finally cracked. "Are we going to talk about it?" I asked, low enough that no one else could hear. Henry looked up from his food. Just once. Long enough to make sure I was serious. "Do you want to?" he asked. I hesitated. That was the problem. I didn't know what wanting meant anymore. "I don't know," I admitted. He nodded. "Then we don't have to." "Not yet. Not yet." Those two words followed me for days. We existed in a strange in-between. Not just co-workers. Not anything else either. There were no more late-night invites. No almost kisses. Just tension stretched thin and humming quietly under everything we did. Until it snapped. It happened during a presentation. High stakes. Senior leadership in the room. I was leading, Henry supporting like always. Everything was going fine until a VP asked a question I hadn't anticipated. One of those questions that exposes every weak seam at once. I froze. Just for half a second, but I felt it. The old panic. The pressure to have every answer, to be everything at once. Before I could spiral, Henry stepped in smoothly. He reframed the question. Covered the gap. Gave me time to breathe without making it obvious. When the meeting ended, the room buzzed with approval. People filed out, congratulating us. The door closed behind the last person. I exhaled hard and dropped into a chair. "Thank you," I said, rubbing my face. "I missed that." Henry leaned against the table, watching me. "I know." Something in his voice, gentler than usual, made me look up. "You don't always have to prove yourself," he added. "Not to them. Not to me." That did it. "Then what do you want from me?" I asked, sharper than I meant to. Silence. Henry straightened slowly. "I want you to stop pretending this doesn't matter." My pulse spiked. "And if I do?" "Then we figure it out," he said. "Like adults. Without hiding." I stood. Too fast. The room suddenly felt too small. "You're my replacement," I said. "My backup." This was never supposed to dash. "I'm not replacing you," he cut in, firm but calm. "And you know that." I opened my mouth. Closed it. "I didn't plan this," he said quietly. "But I'm not walking away from it just to make it easier." "For who?" I asked. "For you," he said. "For me." The truth hit hard and clean. I was the one clinging to temporary because it gave me control. Because it meant I didn't have to decide anything. Henry wasn't asking for a promise. He was asking for honesty. "I'm scared," I said finally. His expression softened. "I know. And if this goes wrong, it might," he said. "But not trying is still a choice." I laughed weakly. "You're infuriatingly reasonable." He smiled. "You noticed. That night I didn't go home alone. I went to his place again. This time not by accident. And when he closed the door behind us, I realized something terrifying and undeniable. Henry hadn't taken too much space in my life. I'd been emptying it for him. Being at Henry's place the second time felt different. Not tentative. Not borrowed. Intentional. He poured wine again. I noticed my glass didn't shake this time. We sat close on the couch, TV on but ignored. My knee bounced once, twice. Henry noticed immediately. "Hey," he said softly, turning toward me. "You don't have to be anywhere else right now." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I'm not good at this part." "Neither am I," he admitted. "I just hide it better." That earned a small laugh. I stared at the ceiling, thoughts threatening to spin. Henry shifted slightly. "You're thinking too loud." I huffed. "Am I that obvious?" "With you? Always." I turned my head toward him. "This changes things." He nodded. "Yeah. You're okay with that?" "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." Silence settled again. Not awkward. Processing. "What happens when your contract ends?" I asked quietly. Henry didn't answer right away. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I do know I don't want this to only exist inside a countdown." That landed hard. I rolled onto my side to face him. I don't want to wake up one day and realize you slowly replaced parts of my life I never meant to give away. He met my gaze steadily. I'm not trying to replace anything. I want to add to it. I searched his face for uncertainty. Found none. That scared me almost as much as it grounded me. The weeks after that were intense. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just dense with meaning. Mornings together before work. Stolen looks in meetings. Fingers brushing under the table. We didn't tell anyone, not because we were ashamed, but because it felt fragile. But reality has a way of intruding. One afternoon, my boss called me into her office. "Charles," she said, smiling in that measured way, "we've been very impressed with Henry's performance." My stomach tightened. "We're considering making his role permanent," she continued, "possibly restructuring the team." I nodded slowly. "Okay." She leaned forward. "This could affect reporting lines. We'd want to discuss how you feel about that." How I felt. I walked back to my desk in a daze. Henry looked up immediately. "You okay?" he asked. I sat down slowly. "We need to talk." That night, in his apartment, the mood was different. Heavy. Serious. "They might keep you," I said. "For real." Henry studied me. "Is that a problem?" I opened my mouth. Closed it. "No," I said honestly. "But it's not nothing either." He nodded. I figured, because now it wasn't about temporary anymore. It was about space, and whether we could share it without losing ourselves. The idea of Henry becoming permanent changed the temperature of everything. Before, there'd always been an expiration date hovering quietly in the background. Something we could point to if things got complicated. Temporary. A built-in excuse. Now that safety net was gone. At work, I found myself watching him more carefully, not with longing this time, but with awareness. How confidently he spoke in meetings. How easily people deferred to him. How naturally he fit into a role that had once felt exclusively mine. It stirred something ugly in me. Not jealousy of other people. Fear of being replaced. One evening, a few days after that conversation, I stayed late on purpose. I told Henry the first had calls. I just needed to sit alone in my office and feel like myself again. The version of me that existed before us. He didn't push, just sent a message around 9. "Henry, still alive?" Me, "Barely." "Henry, I'll take that as a no on dinner." Me, "Rain check." "Henry, always." That always should have comforted me. Instead, it made my chest feel tight. The tension came to a head the following week. We were in a strategy meeting with leadership when someone casually suggested shifting certain responsibilities, my responsibilities, under Henry's oversight. It was framed as efficiency, collaboration, progress. I nodded along, took notes, played the role. Inside, something burned. Afterward, I didn't wait. I walked straight into an empty conference room and shut the door harder than necessary. A minute later, Henry followed. "Okay," he said carefully. "Talk to me." "They're turning you into me," I snapped. He blinked. "That's not what It feels like it." I cut in. "First temporary support, then 6 more months. Now this." He stepped closer, grounding but not cornering. "Charles, I'm not trying to take anything from you." "I know," I said, voice tight, "but that doesn't mean it's not happening." Silence stretched. Finally, he said, "Is this about work? Or is this about us?" That landed harder than I expected. I dragged a hand through my hair. "Both." Henry nodded slowly. "Then let's separate them." I laughed bitterly. "You think I haven't tried?" "I think," he said calmly, "you're scared that if I stay, you'll have to admit this isn't just a phase." I looked at him. Really looked. "And if I do?" I asked quietly. "What if I let this be real and then it costs me the one thing I've built for myself?" Henry's expression softened. "Then we talk. We adjust. We don't let it quietly rot into resentment." I swallowed. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he said. "But neither is pretending you don't care." That night I went home alone. Not as punishment. Not as distance. As space. I needed to remember that my life wasn't something Henry had walked into empty. It already existed, messy, full, earned. And if he was going to stay, it had to be as a part of it, not a replacement for it. The next morning, I asked my boss for a meeting. I laid it all out. My role, my boundaries, what collaboration could look like without erasing me. It was uncomfortable, necessary. When I came back to my desk, Henry looked up, searching my face. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I think. Yeah." He smiled, not relieved, not smug, just steady. That night, when I went to his place, it felt different again. Quieter, more grounded, less like an escape, more like a choice. As we sat together, his shoulder warm against mine, I realized something important. Henry hadn't taken too much space in my life. I just finally reached the part where I had to decide what I was willing to share and what I needed to keep for myself. And for the first time, that decision didn't feel like loss. Felt like balance. A month later, Henry got the offer. Permanent. Official. No more asterisk next to his name. He didn't tell me right away. I found out the way I'd found out about his extension through an email that landed in my inbox on a quiet Tuesday morning. I stared at the subject line longer than I needed to. Subject: Team Update. This time, my stomach didn't drop. Settled. I walked over to his desk before I could overthink it. He looked up, already knowing. "So," I said, "congratulations." He searched my face carefully. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, I really am." That was the truth. Somewhere along the way, the fear had stopped shouting and started negotiating. And I'd learned how to listen to myself without shutting him out. That night, we didn't celebrate with anything flashy. Just takeout on my couch, the city blinking outside my window. My window. He didn't comment on that. Didn't assume. Didn't push. That mattered more than he knew. "You remember when you said I was taking up too much space in your life?" he asked casually. I smiled. "Hard to forget. I've been thinking about that," he said. "I don't want to be something that crowds you." I turned toward him. "You're not." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yeah," I said, "because now it feels like you fit. Not because you pushed in, but because I made room on purpose." He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "I've never had someone say it like that." I leaned into him. "Get used to disappointment. I'm not poetic very often." He laughed, low and warm, and kissed the top of my head like it was the most natural thing in the world. Work settled into a new normal after that. Clear boundaries, mutual respect, no unspoken competitions. When people joked about how well we worked together, it no longer felt like a threat. Felt earned. Some nights, I still caught myself pausing, checking in, making sure I hadn't disappeared into us. But every time I did, I found myself still there. Still Charles. Still grounded. Just not alone anymore. One evening, months later, we were leaving the office together when Henry reached for my hand. Public. Casual. No big announcement. I squeezed back. He smiled. Not like someone who'd won something, but like someone who'd been allowed to stay. And that's when it hit me. Henry hadn't been my replacement. He'd been my interruption. The kind that forces you to look up, reassess, and realize your life had room for more than you thought without losing what made it yours in the first place. Turns out, he didn't take too much space in my life at all. He just helped me stop guarding it like it was already full.